Study through Matthew and talking about Jesus' teachings. And so obviously, I'm kind of taking you back a little bit here. I'm in my old school desk, right, where I made a lot of trouble, but also I heard a lot of great, had a lot of great teachers in my life, and maybe you have too. But it reminds me of being a student and the teachers in my life. I know one of my favorites was Mrs. Cunningham, and she like taught my humanities class and my etymology class and English class, and I remember she like would have us read the classics, and I would have no idea like what this goofy stuff meant, but then she would make us dive down deep to figure out what was happening, what was being said behind the scenes. I remember etymology class, she would do all these Latin roots and everything, and it made us all want to figure out the roots in every single word that we talked. And then I remember even in humanities class, she had us do like projects and history type stuff where we actually had to engage in with history stuff. She just made it come alive. In fact, what I want you to do is just maybe turn to a neighbor or two and just tell them who your favorite teacher is, or even if you can't remember their names, maybe what you enjoyed about your favorite teachers. All right, on your mark, get set, share about your favorite teacher. All right, and let me tell you, Matthew's favorite teacher was by far Jesus. His teaching, Jesus' teaching, was going to so change this guy's life that Jesus actually changed his name from hated tax collector Levi. His name was changed to Jesus called and invited, following, studying, observing disciple, world-traveling apostle, gospel recorder, faithful to the end, Matthew. And Jesus was his teacher. Jesus was often called the teacher. Rabbi is what he was called. Rabbi actually means great one. So he really was a great teacher. In fact, he was known for being even greater than the other great teachers. He was entertaining, he was simple and yet profound. But even more, people continually throughout the Gospels, you hear them saying they were impressed by how he taught with authority. Meaning that it wasn't just like quoting and interpreting Bible verses like all the other rabbis did. He was actually speaking for God, ready to show you God. Say, hey, I'm going to tell you a story to give you a snapshot of what I know God looks like. And he had no qualms about that. The other rabbis didn't dare speak like that. He taught like he was God or in good company with God, like he knew him personally. And just like us, Matthew just ate this stuff up. If Mark structured his gospel around the power of Jesus' miracles, Matthew structures his gospel around the wisdom of Jesus' teachings. Last week we looked at his famous Sermon on the Mount about relationships with God and with each other. Wisdom that stood the test of time, still blows our minds today. And this week we are going to flip over to Matthew chapter 13. And we're going to see a teaching style there that Jesus was quite famous for, where the listener was really pressed beyond hearing it to become a student of it. In fact, disciple means student. Matthew was Jesus' student, observing Jesus, following Jesus, studying Jesus, listening to Jesus. And in part, thanks to Matthew for writing this stuff down, 2,000 years later, we're his students too. We are his disciples. And whenever we dive into study his teachings by ourselves, like in the Bible reading plan, or in each other's homes, like in neighborhood groups, or the whole family gathered together like church, Our rabbi, our Savior, absolutely loves it. So let's dive in to chapter 13 in verse 1. That same day, Jesus went out of the house, probably Peter's house in Capernaum, actually one of the places that I got to visit in my first ever trip to Israel this past year. And these are some pictures I took of Capernaum, a city, a medium-sized city, kind of on the north coast of the Sea of Galilee, a place where Jesus and his disciples actually had a significant hub for their ministry. In fact, Peter, his mother-in-law, and his extended family, etc., this is believed to be their house. And it's believed that a lot of that hub of the ministry was actually around this. So probably what's happening here is there's all this stuff going on this day in and around this house. And all the neighborhood is all bustling and everything. And there's all this people drama happening in Capernaum. And Jesus probably needed to get away for a little bit. And he went out and he sat by the lake. Don't you like to go and sit by a lake? Kind of just calms you down. It was the Lake of Gennesaret, the Sea of Galilee. I also got to get away there too. Got to go out on a boat on top of it, and sit on the shore alongside. And I tell you what, like a lot of the things in Israel, there's like things built on top of things that commemorate this, this one thing or this one place. You can't build something over the Sea of Galilee. So it's like one of those places where it just feels like you are walking, boating in the same place that Jesus was. And so it's just so cool. If you ever get the opportunity to do that, whether that it's through the church, I know at the end of this year, just take advantage of that. That is just pretty cool stuff. But he's sitting there by the lake, and such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat. Probably a boat, a simple boat, a lot like this one that they actually accidentally found, dredged it up, and found out, measured it back. It was from the 1st century. So they even call it the Jesus boat, right? Just because it was from that same time period. And so he's probably just kind of sitting on this boat, and all the people stood around on the shore. Because the boat is probably anchored like there in a shallow little finger of the sea, of the lake, so that the crowd could gather on all three sides, around, like kind of like an amphitheater. And in the boat, then he's actually raised up a little bit, like he's on his own stage. And the water would even serve as an amplifier for his voice. It was like pre-high tech. It was like God tech, And from this boat to this crowd, here's that special way that Jesus often taught. He told them many things in parables, earthly stories with heavenly meanings. The kind of teaching that called the listener, kind of painted a picture and called the listener to come into the picture and have to be thoughtful and go deeper and get creative to kind of figure out the meaning and flesh it out in their own lives and see how does it apply. And he starts out with this most famous parable of his. Now a lot of us have probably heard like a zillion times. And it's the parable of the sower. A farmer, actually before I say it, though, before we read it, there was another place in Israel that I got to visit, and it was Nazareth. And a small town that Jesus grew up in, probably less than 150 people. It was tiny. Most of them were all from the same family, same tribe, so they crossed each other's paths all the time. They were in and out of each other's homes and fields. And so no matter their skills or their professions, they were all farmers. It's how you put food on the table. Well, I got to visit this place called Nazareth village. At first, I was a little bummed out because I was like, oh, it's just going to be one of those living histories where they kind of pretend like, they're in an old place. And that's the way it started out, but by rules, you have to actually explore the land before you put something on it. And as they dug down, what they found was actually the remnants of a first century farm on this land. And so you can even see it. You can even see some of the things that Jesus would have grown up seeing, probably played in these fields, ran through these fields, maybe even worked these fields with his family and his families. But you've got, think of his parables. This watchtower over a wine press in the bedrock there. Narrow paths and wide paths, sheep and goats and gardens and farms, all kinds of stuff. And the one I had to take a picture of was the farm. It wasn't a vast, flat farm like we think of. It was on this rugged, sloped land. It was like terraced farms. And so like each terrace is maybe like a different family, maybe it's a different crop, but it's kind of this shared thing. And so you've got these rock walls that then make some flat place of some good soil. You've got weedy things happening all around it. You've got rocks happening, and you've got these paths that kind of wind in between all of these different garden plots and these farm fields. And so as I'm looking at that, I'm looking at what Jesus was looking at growing up, and he's saying stuff that people, they know this imagery. That's what I got to see is what Jesus sees, and he paints the picture, and he says, hey, this is the story. There's a farmer, goes out to sow his seed, and he sows it, he scatters it out anywhere and everywhere. And some fell along the path, hard path, and the birds came and ate it up before it could really get in there. Some of that seed kind of fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil. Probably those walls, right? The rock walls. Some of it landed in there. And it gets into some dirt, and it would spring up quickly because, the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants that were in that rock stuff, it would just get scorched, and they withered because they had no root. They had no way to really go down deep. And other seed fell among the thorns, kind of the weedy stuff on the outskirts of these farms and of these plots of land, anywhere where just all these thorns, which grew up and over the plant that was growing, but it kind of choked them out, choked the plants out. Still, though, other seed that was scattered by the farmer fell on good soil. They're in that nice, terraced part, and it's kind of plowed, it's kind of deep, and, it's made for it. And it fell on that good soil where it produced a crop, 100, 60, 30 times what was sown in those seeds. It's a simple everyday story to simple everyday people who had seen and done this very simple everyday thing for years in everyday life. I'm just watching this, and I'm seeing this picture right in front of me of this terraced field. But more than a picture in front of me, I was reminded of the spiritual picture that Jesus was painting. He said, whoever has ears to hear what I'm saying, whoever has eyes to see through this picture to what I'm really saying, let them hear that and let them see that. Engage with this story and understand the deeper application, the heavenly meaning of this story. Really grapple with it, of the farmer who scatters his seed anywhere and everywhere.